Good morning, reading room. It's a little chilly. It gets chilly in here. It gets chilly in here. So I keep a scarf handy. And dramatic. Chilly and dramatic. Let's continue reading our book that we are reading in the reading room. Being Catholic Now by Kerry Kennedy. I'm loving this book again. I am revisiting it, and I love the revisit. So let's get it going, shall we? Today we are reading from Sister Joan Chittister. What? Honest to gosh. Chittister? Sister Chittister? That's what it says. She's an OSB. Oh, that is. Chittister. That's what it is. Joan. Sister Joan. They had to call her Sister Joan. We call them Sister Maria. We call them by their first name. Sister Maria, Sister Anne, Sister Theophane, Sister Clarita, Sister Menopause. Joan Chittister, born April 26th, the last one was April 23rd, 1936, has been one of the church's key visionary voices and spiritual leaders for more than 30 years. A Benedictine sister, she's an award-winning author and international lecturer on behalf of peace, human rights, women's issues, justice, and church renewal. Let's see what Sister Joan has to say. There's Lucy right there. She's listening too. You want to see her? One day in second grade, I'm told that Protestants don't go to heaven. I adored the second grade teacher. Here was the rule. I was stunned. I was the only child in that class who didn't have a Catholic mother and Catholic father. My dad had died when I was 3, and my mom married my stepfather, a Protestant. Every single year I was embarrassed on the first day of school when you signed the registration form because every sister who ever taught me thought I'd made a mistake. Mixed marriages, that euphemism for crossing boundaries, just didn't exist, and the local parish priest railed against them. He talked about parents whose children married non-Catholics and that they would be committing a sin if they went to the marriage of their own children. Dear God, help us. So I was living and being dimmed by all that. I'm in religious class in the second grade, and out of it comes again in no uncertain terms. All the feelings I had felt, I now see are the rule. They are the law. Well, I raced out of the school that night. I did not stay to clean the board. I didn't carry out the water paper basket. I didn't do papers for sister. I just shot out of there. Why? Because in my family, my stepfather and I got home at almost the same time every day. I came down the opposite side of the street from school. We walked in. Everybody said hello. And the first question was always to me. What did you learn in school today, Joan? Well, this was the first thing I wanted to say in front of my father. This was big news. This was the biggest thing in school that day as far as I was concerned. I raced home through the alley, over the fence, up to the house. My mother was in the kitchen doing dishes. I had to talk to her alone. She looked at me and said, "What happened to you? What'd you learn in school today that's got you so excited?" I looked at her and I said, right up, "Today I learned that Protestants don't go to heaven." And my mother didn't move. And then she said very quietly, "And what do you think about that, Joan?" And I said, "I think sister is wrong." My mother said, "Why do you think sister is wrong?" I thought for a minute and I said, "Sister doesn't know Daddy. She didn't have all the information, you see. Sister would never be wrong if somebody had told her all the information." So it was clear that she'd never seen anything like this. So my mother pulls me over and says, "What'd you say to Sister Joan?" And I remember the shame, even telling this story now. I said, "I didn't say anything." My mother hugged me against her and said, "You're a very bright little girl and I'm proud of you, Joan. You didn't have to say anything now. You can tell sister later." Honest to God, I think I've spent my whole life waiting to tell people how wrong that was. I was affected by it negatively as a child, and yet out of that negative experience and pressure came a positive drive to eliminate it from my own life, not to be part of any religion that somehow was the oppressor of others of another religion. I had no power in the system. I had no voice in the system, but down deep in me I knew, and it shaped my life. I spent my whole life with a foot on each side of the fence, and I absolutely refused to move either foot. I was an only child when my mother became a widow at age 21. She was getting ready to take me to the funeral home, and her brothers and sisters were having a fit. They kept saying, "You can't take that baby to a funeral home." And my mother, who was terribly undereducated but extremely bright, was furious and said to them, "You're out of your minds. What is she supposed to think? That her father just disappeared? That he left? That he's never coming back? She has to know he's dead. She has to be allowed to grieve him just the way the rest of us will." She took me and she carried me up to the casket. She was holding me. I remember it. I had my little hands around her face. I could feel the wetness, and I knew. I looked down at the end of the casket, and there sat the strangest looking people I'd ever seen in my life, all wrapped up in black. They had on these white face kinds of things and big sleeves. You couldn't see anything. Whatever these were, they were just sitting there like little Russian nested dolls. And I said to my mother, "What are those?" And my mother said, "Joan, those are very special friends of God's, very special friends of your daddy's, and they give little girls daddies to God. So they'll stay here. When angels come tonight, they'll say, 'This is Joan's daddy. He is a very good man. You take him straight to God so that he doesn't have to wait anyplace else.'" Wow, I thought to myself, how could you do better than that? I made up my mind on the spot, and I spent the rest of my young life waiting to go to the monastery. When I got to the Catholic schools, I didn't experience any of the horror stories that people tell. I had wonderful sisters. They were funny, smart, kind. Most of the time, they were very just. I couldn't think of anything better to do with life. If you equate holiness and spirituality with unspeaking deference, if you assume the role of the spiritual woman as some kind of support system rather than resource, then you diminish the whole tradition of religious life for women. I'm a Benedictine. This order is over 1,500 years old. There is no institution in the church that's older except the church itself. And these early monasteries of women had fine schools, the ones whose archives they even bothered to keep list the number of bishops who were taught in these schools. They were royal abbeys, meaning they had been founded by queens and princesses. They had fine lineage, good education, and a place of esteem in the society and in themselves when they entered. They were seeing something beyond the material. Women got caught in the theology of sexuality rather than the theology of humanity. When celibacy was imposed on men in the 13th century, that's when the cloister was imposed on women. As the church became more institutionalized, women had more cloister imposed on them, both within the church and in society in general. No good woman went out alone. No good woman went out at night. No good woman functioned on her own in society. So today you say to women, yes, you're right about all the history. Yes, you're right about all that theology. And yes, it's wrong. Now what it takes are strong women whose relationship with God is so profound, so stable, and so clear in terms of their own call to make this world in terms of their own call to make this world a better place. It's a call to us now to reverse this kind of subservience as a substitution for sanctity, and to help women regain and develop their rightful place in the mind of God for the sake of the people of God. We can't just take it and we can't just abandon it. It's too valuable, too valued, too beautiful a life in the tradition to simply destroy it. I grew up at the tail end of the Catholic youth organization movement. It may have been a kind of a carryover from the church's participation in the labor movement and the whole question of just wages and unions after the war. I went to the Benedictines, and in our academy, the whole notion of I'm a citizen of two worlds was just part of the air you breathed. It was the ethos of the place. The assumption was that if you were a young Catholic woman, you were dedicated to the development of the poor. Quite frankly, at that period, the poor to whom you were devoted would have been largely Catholic. We were still coming out of that Irish need not apply period, and Catholics definitely needn't apply. It was a response to the anti-Catholicism of the time, but most of all to the awareness after the war that there was a poverty problem in the United States. We're Benedictines, so we pray together 3 times a day to Psalms and Scripture. The interesting thing is that the rule of Benedict says that prayers should be brief, so that those words can wash through you all day long, so that your mind is somehow attuned to these messages and their effect on your own life. The Benedictine lives a life of contemplation and meditation at all times. We'll read the Bible through and then we start over again. The scriptures become then the heartbeat of your life. They're the pulse that goes through the spiritual body of a Benedictine community, and it becomes the very breath you breathe. This is interesting to learn, isn't it, about Catholic history. After Vatican II, religious orders were going through all of this change, and there was a great deal of confusion. There was a lot of polarization, uncertainty, anger, and concerns about what sisters were going through in this period while they were trying to adapt life to a new society, and a lot was swirling around the whole issue of the habit. Should you wear the habit? What's the habit about? And it was a big thing for me because I love the tradition and I love the order and certainly didn't want to lose it. I can honestly remember the day I said to myself, Joan, it comes down to this. Are you or are you not a Benedictine in the bathtub? The community always says that the only thing that's gotten me through is my own sense of humor, however bad it may be. It may be outrageous, but it's clear. What might have been my greatest human achievement has been the ability to make the transition from the trappings of a thing to the essence of really discovering that if you want the religious life, you don't lose it by living life as a normal and full human being. There is an old monastic story that says something like this. When a drunk goes into a cell, the cell becomes a tavern. And when the monk goes into a tavern, the tavern becomes a cell. We create the environment that we're in. Change really doesn't happen from the top, not in the Catholic Church. It happens from the bottom, and it happens over long periods of time. The whole notion that the Catholic Church doesn't change is only said by people who don't know history. It's a changing body. But the problem is that some people get chewed up in that long, slow process. That is the sin of the church. But that is what happens when you're the vanguard of articulator of any idea in a developmental process. We need a stable church with a stable message. That's what I love about the Catholic Church, is that Jesus's message does not change. That is a stable message. I think, even though it's got what feels like contradictions, it's a very stable message. That's what we really want from the church. But the changes in the church have to do with criminality, and that should not be slow. That change should not be slow. We don't need, that change in criminal behavior should not be slow. We don't need progressive ideas from the church. We need stable moral ideas from the church. However, we know what's right and wrong. We knew that when we were 5 and 6 years old. The first thing I do is to bring women into all arenas of the church, all areas of authority and idea development. I'd make the church a universal church instead of a male church, and I do it overnight. Why? That's the only way that you're going to hear and develop the full theology of the church. Don't talk to me about social justice and do nothing about the case of women. That's what I'm talking about. That change should not be slow. We shouldn't be talking about abortion and have so many unwanted pregnancies. Ugh. Don't talk to me about the sanctity of marriage and do nothing about the training of men and make attitudes towards the way the family goes together. Don't talk to me about justice and assume that half of the human race can simply carry the injustice of the other half and offer it up. I won't go there. Oh, how is that for beautiful? Don't talk to me about justice and assume that half the human race can simply carry the injustice of the other half and offer it up. I won't go there. I'm far closer to the ideas of Teilhard de Chardin. Chardin says that when we die, we enter into the stream of life. I don't know what that is. I presume that there may well be a consciousness that goes with it, but I don't find that necessary. Let me put it this way. Life has been good. Life is a great gift, and I don't believe that something this great was meant to go to nothing. I also believe that we spend too much time in our puny little minds. The first thing we say is God is all mystery. No one can know God. Then we explain to you quite precisely what God is about and everything God thinks and all the rules that God wants kept. There's not a single message about narcotics in the Bible. Now, you think God would have been concerned about that? I have a funny feeling that we do God as much disservice as we do service. These words are just so it's just inadequate. They're so wise. They just strike the highest order of wisdom for me. That sounds better. Doris Kearns Goodwin. I think I showed you Sister Joan's picture, didn't I? Wise words from Sister Joan. I expect nothing less. And again, I was so disappointed because I really like Bill Maher, and I thought that the worst one I read of all of them, who put so little thought into what he had to say, was Bill Maher. So here is Doris Kearns Goodwin. Opinion number 476. I don't mean hers, I mean mine about Bill Maher. Doris Kearns Goodwin, born January 4th, 1943, is a presidential historian who has written award-winning books on Johnson, Kennedy, Lincoln, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and is currently an analyst for NBC News. A lifelong baseball fan, she grew up in Rockville Center, a religiously diverse New York suburb. Okay. Let's hear what Doris has to say. The reason why Catholicism remains such an emotional force in all of us is that the memories are so intense. They all tend to be stories in a certain sense about what happened when you were a young Catholic child and had all of those notions filling your head about heaven and hell, purgatory, and limbo. Growing up in Rockville Center, we had this beautiful cathedral for a church, which was part of the magic of it. Preparing for my first confession, I was terrified that I'd committed 2 sins that related to baseball, which was my other passion beyond the church when I was growing up. The first sin had to do with the fact that the Dodgers catcher, Roy Campanella, was coming to speak in our hometown on Long Island. It was announced that he was speaking in a Protestant church, which sent shivers down my spine. I believed that stepping foot in a Protestant church was committing a mortal sin. When I walked over the threshold of the church that night, my legs trembled beneath me. I was worried that I'd traded the life of my everlasting soul at 7 years old for that one night with Roy Campanella. That sin still rested on me when a couple of days later, 2 trains collided at the stadium in my town. I began to discern from this horrible calamity that the opportunity for my redemption. We learned in catechism that if you were present when somebody was dying and if no priest was at hand, you could, as a lay person, baptize the wounded. They could go to heaven and your sins would be wiped out. Never had I needed to have my sins wiped out more than with Roy Campanella on my soul. I had been practicing baptisms on my doll for months in hopes that I might be needed. The only thing that prevented me from the humiliation of lifting the blankets at the train station and asking seriously injured people if they wanted me, a 7-year-old, to baptize them was that the train station was right across from the church, so there were plenty of priests on the scene. I still had this sin to deal with. When I went to my first confession, I made the decision to tell the priest about it right away, figuring that I could get it over with, then maybe I'd be able to relax. He told me exactly what my father had said, that it wasn't a religious service, so it wasn't a sin. But then he said, "And what else, my child?" I tried to hide the other sin relating to baseball in the mix of talking in church several times, disobeying my mother 5 times, wishing harm to others, and telling fibs. Unfortunately, he asked me, "On whom did you wish harm?" I had to admit that I wished that various players, all of our competitors, would break arms, legs, and ankles so that the Brooklyn Dodgers could win their first World Series. The priest said to me, "How often did you make these terrible wishes?" I had to admit every night when I said my prayers, I explained that if God were powerful enough to spread these injuries around, he could cure everyone the moment that the Dodgers won the World Series. Fortunately, it turns out that the priest was a baseball fan. He said, "I promise you someday they will win fairly and squarely. You do not need to wish harm on other players." As I left the confessional, he said, "Say a special prayer for the Brooklyn Dodgers." Another time I was going to a game at Ebbers Field and Gil Hodges, the Dodgers first baseman, was in a terrible slump. People in parishes all over Brooklyn were praying for him. He was a beloved player, but he just couldn't hit day after day and week after week. I had won a St. Christopher's medal blessed by the Pope for having known the 7 deadly sins. I was down to the finals and was pitted against a parochial school student. I remember having the feeling that most of the audience and the sisters would pray for her to win instead of me. She got most of them, but she didn't remember gluttony. So I won this medal. I used to be believed that St. Christopher was the patron saint of travel, and he would help you travel safely. I brought it to the park with me, and I thought that if I gave it to Gil Hodges, then he would be able to travel safely around the bases and get out of his slump. He took it and said he was grateful. He was such a gracious man. I must have looked ridiculous with this medal. The next day he hit well, and I was certain I was responsible. There is an epilogue. In 2001, I met Hodge's widow, and she told me that she still had the St. Christopher's medal. It was such a happy moment. Because my mother had been so sick, suffering a series of little heart attacks before the ones that killed her when I was 15, there was a sense of sadness as to why God had not allowed her to be healthy. I don't remember being angry at God, but just feeling sad about our whole family situation. Before she died, my instinct was to pray that she would get better, so I definitely had a sense of trying to talk to God. Her death didn't turn me against religion or God. When you're an adolescent, the primary reaction is feeling as if you're in a different place from other people. Fortunately, that didn't last too long because I really loved school and had a lot of friends. I remember talking with Rose Kennedy about the early deaths of 4 of her 9 children and what it'd be like if they could come back to life. She was convinced that they would still choose the lives they'd been given, even though they had been short, because of the productivity, fulfillment, and adventure of those. To think about it, I suppose she found enormous solace in this idea. It makes complete sense to prefer a full life, even if it's a shorter number of years, since it's all preparation for the next world. I couldn't find that same sense of solace when I thought about my own kids. Absolutely. My Catholic upbringing influenced my decisions to stay home and care for my kids when they were young. There's one story from when the kids were little that I specifically recall. I was working endlessly on the Kennedy book, but it hadn't come out yet, and I wasn't teaching anymore. I was at a cocktail party and somebody said, "Whatever happened to Doris Kearns anyway?" They didn't realize that I could hear. I wanted to hit them and say, "I have 3 boys. That's what happened to me. Family was a priority." Now my children are in their late 20s and 30s, leading lives of service to their communities. I'd like to believe that the combination of some Jewish traditions and rituals and some Catholic ones has allowed them to become the kinds of human beings they are. There's something about the rituals of the church that are so beautiful. The act of shared celebrations, shared moments of sadness, and then coming away from that to happy celebrations that make you feel connected to something larger than a family or a neighborhood. You're connected to a community, a church, and therefore a country. Part of the passion for history is the great pleasure of catapulting yourself back to another era and imagining what it was like to walk around during the Civil War, World War II, or the 1960s. In the Catholic Church, there are different levels that you're living on: personal life, religious life, life on this earth, and a life later on. It gives you a sense of dimension, and that's what history does well. Abraham Lincoln had a real obsession with being remembered after he died. The interesting question is, does the deep Catholic faith or a belief in afterlife soften the need? It seems in Lincoln's case, not believing or not being sure that there was an afterlife made him even more passionate to do something. Otherwise, you were just dead. That is why when his first love, Anne Rutledge, died at 22, he couldn't bear it when the rain fell on her grave. I think that would make it even more compelling to accomplish something if you didn't believe that one's soul goes somewhere. Some people were worried that Lincoln had never joined an organized church and that he didn't go to church regularly on Sundays. One of his friends said that if you judged Lincoln by organized religion and the rituals of the church, he might not appear a religious man, but if you judged him by the ethical and moral values by which he led his life, compassion, kindness, sensitivity, and empathy, then he was as religious as anyone else could possibly be. Religion helps people develop moral, ethical, and emotional values. That's what you're looking for when you look at public figures. Franklin Roosevelt chose brilliantly on the eve of D-Day when he had to figure out what to tell the American people about the fact that our troops were beginning to finally invade northern France and that there might be many deaths. He chose the form of a prayer, and it was perfectly toned at that point in time to do so. This is the book Being Catholic Now by Kerry Kennedy that we are reading 37 different perspectives on what it means to 37 different popular people, known people, about what it means to them to be Catholic. That was awesome. We're going to come back with James Carroll. All right. This has been The Reading Room. Thank you so much for joining me on day 178. We are here 3 days on. This is Hump Day. Tomorrow's our third day on. We're back after 4 days off next Tuesday, but we still have one more day. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Thanks for joining me here in The Reading Room, the classroom where we get your mind, your body, and your spirit as healthy as we can. Thanks.